The 1896 Naval Expansion Plan, developed post-First Sino-Japanese War, included 4 armored cruisers and 4 additional battleships, all of which had to be commissioned from British shipyards due to Japan's lack of domestic shipbuilding capacity. In response to the Russian naval buildup, the IJN recognized that the battleships ordered initially might be inadequate against the Imperial Russian Navy. Financial constraints prevented ordering more battleships, so the IJN opted to increase the number of more cost-effective armored cruisers from 4 to 6. This revision became known as the 6-6 Fleet. Unlike most contemporaries designed for commerce raiding or colonial defense, Izumo and her sister ships were intended for fleet scouting and to serve in the battle line. Izumo measured 132.28 meters overall and 121.92 meters between perpendiculars, with a beam of 20.94 meters and an average draft of 7.26 meters. The ship displaced 9,503 metric tons at normal load and had a crew of 672 officers and enlisted personnel. Izumo was powered by 2 4-cylinder triple-expansion steam engines, each connected to a single propeller shaft. Steam was generated by 24 Belleville boilers, with the engines rated at a combined 14,500 indicated horsepower. The ship's design speed was 20.75 knots, but she reached 21.74 knots during sea trials. With a coal capacity of 1,551 tons, she could steam up to 7,000 nautical miles at 10 knots. The primary armament of all 6-6 Fleet armored cruisers consisted of 4 8-inch guns housed in twin-gun turrets positioned fore and aft of the superstructure. The secondary armament included 14 Elswick Ordnance Company Pattern Z quick-firing 6-inch guns, with only 4 not mounted in armored casemates on the main and upper decks. Those on the upper deck were shielded by gun shields. Izumo was also fitted with a dozen quick-firing 12-pounder 12 CWT guns and 8 quick-firing F-2.5-pounder Yamauchi guns for close-range defense against torpedo boats. Additionally, the ship featured 4 submerged 457mm torpedo tubes, 2 on each broadside. All 6-6 Fleet armored cruisers shared the same armor scheme with slight variations. A Krupp cemented armor waterline belt ran the entire length of the ship, varying in thickness from 178mm amidships to 89mm at the bow and stern. The belt was 2.13 meters high, with 1.39 meters typically submerged. An upper strake of 127mm armor extended from the upper edge of the waterline belt to the main deck, stretching 51.18 meters from the forward to the rear barbette. The Izumo-class also featured 127mm oblique armored bulkheads that sealed the ends of the central armored citadel. The barbettes, gun turrets, and the front of the casemates were all protected by 6 inches of armor, while the sides and rear of the casemates had 51mm of armor. The deck was shielded by 63mm of armor, and the conning tower had armor 356mm thick. Izumo, named after the Izumo province, was contracted to Armstrong Whitworth on the 24th of September 1897. The ship was laid down at their Elswick shipyard on 14th May 1899, launched on 19th September, and completed on the 25th of September 1900. She set sail for Japan on October 2nd under Captain Inoue Toshio, who had been appointed on the 29th of September 1899 to oversee her construction and bring her back to Japan. Izumo arrived in Yokosuka on 8 December, where Inoue was confirmed in his command. At the outset of the Russo-Japanese War, Izumo, now commanded by Captain Miyaoka Naoki, served as the flagship of Vice Admiral Kamimura Hikonojo, leader of the Second Fleet. She took part in the Battle of Port Arthur on 9th of February 1904, when Vice Admiral Togo Haihachiro led the combined fleet in an attack on the Russian Pacific Squadron anchored near Port Arthur. Togo had anticipated that a surprise night attack by his destroyers would leave the Russians disorganized and vulnerable. but they had quickly recovered and were ready for his assault. The Japanese ships were spotted by the protected cruiser Boyarin, patrolling offshore, which alerted the Russians. Togo chose to bombard the Russian coastal defenses with his main armament and engage the ships with his secondary guns. However, this division of fire proved ineffective, as the Japanese 8- and 6-inch guns inflicted little damage while the Russian ships concentrated their fire on the Japanese with some success. Although ships on both sides sustained hits, Russian casualties totaled around 150, while the Japanese suffered approximately 90 killed and wounded before Togo disengaged. In early March, Kamimura was ordered to lead the reinforced 2nd Division north to create a diversion off Vladivostok. While searching for Russian ships in the area, the Japanese cruisers bombarded Vladivostok's harbor and defenses on 6th of March with minimal results. Upon their return to Japan a few days later, the 2nd Division was tasked with escorting the transports carrying the Imperial Guards Division to Korea, and then joining the blockade of Port Arthur. In mid-April, Kamimura was sent north to patrol the Sea of Japan and defend the Korea Strait against any attempts by the Vladivostok Independent Cruiser Squadron, led by Rear Admiral Carl Jessen, to break through and link up with the Pacific Squadron. The two forces narrowly missed each other on the 24th due to heavy fog, and the Japanese cruisers proceeded to Vladivostok, where they laid several minefields before returning to Wonsan on the 30th. The division was unable to intercept the Russian squadron on the 15th of June as it attacked several transports south of Okinoshima Island due to heavy rain and fog. The Russians ventured out again on June 30th, and Kamimura finally managed to intercept them near Okinoshima the following day. However, fading light allowed the Russians to disengage under the cover of darkness. On 17th July, Jessen's squadron set out for Japan's eastern coast, aiming to create a diversion and draw Japanese forces away from the Sea of Japan and the Yellow Sea. Passing through Tsugaru Strait 2 days later, the Russian ships began capturing vessels bound for Japan. Their presence off Tokyo Bay on the 24th prompted the Naval General Staff to order Kamimura to sail to Cape Toi Misaki, Kyushu, fearing Jessen might circumnavigate Japan to reach Port Arthur. 2 days later, Kamimura was redirected north to the Kii Channel and then to Tokyo Bay on the 28th. Finally, on the 30th, he was ordered back to Tsushima Island. That same day, he learned that Jessen's ships had passed through Tsugaru Strait early that morning and reached Vladivostok by August 1st. On August 10th, the ships at Port Arthur attempted a breakout to Vladivostok, but were turned back in the Battle of the Yellow Sea. Jessen was ordered to rendezvous with them, but the order was delayed. His 3 armored cruisers, Rossia, Gromoboy, and Rurik, needed time to raise steam, so he did not set out until the evening of 13th August. By dawn, he had reached Tsushima, but turned back upon failing to spot any ships from the Port Arthur squadron. About 36 miles north of the island, he encountered Kamimura's squadron, which included 4 modern armored cruisers, Iwate, Tokiwa, Azuma, and Izumo. The 2 squadrons had passed each other during the night without making contact, and both reversed course around first light, placing the Japanese ships directly in the path of the Russian route to Vladivostok. At 0500, upon spotting the Japanese ships, Jessen ordered his squadron to turn northeast, and the Japanese followed, albeit on a slightly converging course. Both sides began firing around 0523 at a range of 8,500 meters. The Japanese concentrated their fire on Rurik, the rear ship of the Russian formation, which was quickly hit and began to lag behind the other 2 ships. In response, Jessen turned southeast to increase the distance, but this maneuver blinded the Russian gunners with the rising sun and prevented their broadside guns from targeting the Japanese. Around 0600, Jessen made a 180-degree turn to starboard, aiming to reach the Korean coast and allow Rurik to rejoin the squadron. Kamimura followed at 0610 but turned to port, which widened the gap between the squadrons. Izumo then experienced engine problems, forcing the Japanese squadron to slow down to match her speed. Firing resumed at 0624, and Rurik was hit 3 times in the stern, flooding her steering compartment, which forced her to be steered using her engines. Her speed continued to drop, further exposing her to Japanese fire, and by 0640, her steering jammed to port. Jessen executed another 180-degree turn, attempting to position his 2 ships between the Japanese and Rurik. However, Rurik unexpectedly turned to starboard, increased speed, and maneuvered between Jessen's ships and the Japanese. Kamimura also made a 180-degree turn, aligning both squadrons on parallel southeast courses, but Jessen quickly made another 180-degree turn, putting them on opposing courses. Around 0745, the Russians reversed course for the 3rd time in an effort to support Rurik, even though Rosia was on fire. Her fires were extinguished about 20 minutes later. By 0800, Kamimura had circled Rurik to the south, allowing the other 2 Russian ships to move to his north, providing them an unobstructed route to Vladivostok. Despite this, Jessen turned back once more at 0815, ordering Rurik to make her own way to Vladivostok before he turned north at his maximum speed of about 18 knots. Around this time, Kamimura's 2 older protected cruisers, Naniwa and Takachiho, were approaching from the south. Their arrival allowed Kamimura to pursue Jessen with all of his armored cruisers, leaving the 2 new arrivals to deal with Rurik. A running battle ensued between the Japanese and Russians for the next hour and a half, during which the Japanese scored enough hits to slow the Russian ships to 15 knots. The Japanese closed into a minimum range of about 5,000 meters, but Kamimura then increased the distance to 6,500 meters. Around 1000 hours, Kamimura's gunnery officer mistakenly reported that Izumo had expended 3/4 of her ammunition, prompting Kamimura to turn back after a 5-minute rapid-fire barrage. Concerned about leaving the Tsushima Strait unguarded, he intended to use his remaining ammunition on Rurik. However, by this time, Rurik had already been sunk by Naniwa and Takachiho. Although Kamimura did not receive the radio message confirming her sinking, shortly after the Japanese turned back, Gromoboy and Rosia were forced to halt to make repairs. None of the Japanese ships sustained serious damage. Despite Izumo being hit over 20 times, she only suffered 3 men killed and 16 wounded during the battle. She began repairs at Sasebo Naval Arsenal in mid-September. On January 26, 1905, Kamimura again raised his flag on Izumo at Sasebo and then escorted several troop convoys to Wonsan in February. On April 13th, the 2nd Division, including the armored cruisers Tokiwa and Kasuga, sailed to escort mine layers as they laid 715 mines off Vladivostok. As the Russian 2nd and 3rd Pacific Squadrons neared Japan on May 27th, after a long journey from the Baltic Sea, they were spotted by patrolling Japanese ships early that morning. However, poor visibility and weak radio reception hampered communication. Despite these challenges, the initial reports were sufficient for Togo to order his fleet to set sail. The 2nd Division spotted the Russian ships, commanded by Vice Admiral Zinovy Rozhestvensky, around 11:30. Kamimura closed in to a range of about 8,000 meters before veering off under fire to join Togo's battleships. Izumo led the 2nd Division as Togo opened fire on the 2nd Pacific Squadron at 14:10. Like most ships in the division, Izumo targeted the battleship Osliabia, which was forced out of formation at 14:50 and sank 20 minutes later. By then, the Russian formation had fallen into disarray, and Knyaz Suvorov suddenly emerged from the mist at 15:35, just 2,000 meters away. All of Kamimura's ships engaged her for about 5 minutes, with Izumo and the armored cruiser Yakumo also firing torpedoes at the Russian ship, though without success. After 17:30, Kamimura led his division in a futile pursuit of several Russian cruisers, leaving Togo's battleships to operate independently. He abandoned the chase around 1803 and turned north to rejoin Togo. By 1830, his ships had spotted the rear of the Russian battle line and opened fire once the range closed to 8,000 to 9,000 meters. The impact on the Russian ships is unknown, but the Japanese ceased fire by 1930 and rejoined Togo by 2008 as night fell. The next morning, the surviving Russian ships were spotted, and the Japanese opened fire around 10:30, staying out of range of the Russian guns. Rear Admiral Nikolai Nebogatov, realizing he couldn't effectively return fire or close the distance, decided to surrender. During the battle, Izumo was struck by 5 large shells, mostly 12-inch, and 3 smaller shells, mostly 6-inch. These hits caused only minor damage, though one 12-inch shell pierced a boiler uptake, which could have disabled all the middle boilers had it exploded. The shelling resulted in 4 men killed and 26 wounded. As the IJN prepared to invade Sakhalin Island in early July, Kamimura's 2nd Division, now consisting of Iwate, Izumo, and Tokiwa, was tasked with defending the Korea Strait before escorting troops for an amphibious landing in northeastern Korea. In mid-August, the division supported the landing at Chongjin, near the Russian border. On the 20th of September 1909, commanded by Captain Takeshita Isamu, Izumo departed Yokohama for the United States to take part in the Portola Festival in San Francisco. This citywide fair, held from the 19th to 23rd of October, celebrated the 140th anniversary of the Portola expedition, the first recorded Spanish and European land exploration of present-day California, and aimed to demonstrate that San Francisco had recovered from the devastating 1906 earthquake. During this visit, Lieutenant Prince Shimazu Tadashige was assigned to the ship. Additionally, Lieutenant Alan B. Reed, the engineering officer on the USS Albany, and the future commissioning captain of the heavy cruiser USS New Orleans, served as Captain Takeshita's escort while Izumo was in San Francisco. En route, Izumo made port calls in Hawaii, Monterey, Santa Barbara, and San Diego. On 12 November 1913, Izumo was ordered to patrol Mexico's west coast to protect Japanese interests and nationals amid the Mexican Revolution. When Japan declared war on the Central Powers in August 1914, Izumo was stationed off the Mexican coast and was tasked with protecting Allied shipping and searching for German commerce raiders. On 1 November, while off San Francisco, the ship was ordered to join a British task force led by Admiral Sir George Patey near San Clemente Island, which included the battle cruiser Australia and the light cruiser Newcastle. After the German gunboat SMS Geier was interned by the Americans on 8 November, the ex-Russian battleship Heisen and Asama, which had been patrolling off Honolulu, Hawaii, to prevent Geier from escaping, joined the other ships of the American Expeditionary Squadron at Magdalena Bay, Baja California on 22 November. Now under the command of Rear Admiral Moriyama Keizaburo aboard Izumo, the squadron headed south to search for German ships along the western coast of South America. On 11 December, after receiving news of the British victory in the Battle of the Falkland Islands, the squadron moved north to search the waters off Central America, and later Mexican and U.S. waters in January. While patrolling off the coast of Oregon, Izumo received an SOS from the steam schooner Francis H. Leggett, but did not respond due to the nearby presence of a German cruiser. The Leggett subsequently sank, with only 2 survivors out of the 62 people on board. During a search off Baja California, Asama was severely damaged after striking an uncharted rock on January 31st. Izumo, delayed by poor communication, arrived on 12 February, and Moriyama radioed for repair and salvage ships from Japan. Tokiwa relieved Izumo on 19th of March, and Izumo returned home. In June 1917, Izumo replaced the protected cruiser Akashi at Malta, becoming the flagship of Rear Admiral Kozo Sato, commander of the 2nd Special Mission Squadron, which oversaw Japanese destroyers escorting convoys in the Mediterranean Sea. In December 1918, Izumo, accompanied by the destroyers Hinoki and Yanagi, sailed from Malta to Scapa Flow to take control of 7 captured German U-boats as war prizes. They returned to Malta with the U-boats in March 1919. The armored cruiser Nishin, along with 8 destroyers and the U-boats, then sailed to Japan, while Izumo made port calls in Naples, Genoa, and Marseille before arriving in Japan with the remaining destroyers on 2 July 1919. Izumo participated in the 1919 Naval Review held by Emperor Taisho. On 1 September 1921, she was redesignated as a first-class coast defense ship and primarily used for training in long-distance oceanic navigation and officer training for cadets from the Imperial Japanese Navy Academy. In this role, she undertook 6 voyages in the 1920s and 1930s to Europe, North and South America, and Oceania, including a circumnavigation of the globe from August 1921 to April 1922, alongside Yakumo. Among the naval cadets on this voyage were Princes Kuni Asakura and Kacho Hirotada. During a visit to Vancouver, British Columbia, on 7 February 1925, a tugboat collided with one of Izumo's boats at night, resulting in the drowning of 11 crewmen. In 1924, 4 of Izumo's 12-pounder guns were removed, as were all of her quick-firing 2.5-pounder guns, and a single 8-cm 43rd-year type anti-aircraft gun was added. She was refitted again in 1930 to 1931, during which her torpedo tubes were removed. All main deck 6-inch guns were taken out, and their casemates were plated over. She was left with only 4 12-pounders. In 1935, her boilers were replaced with 6 Campon water tube boilers, reducing her output to 7,000 indicated horsepower and lowering her top speed to 16 knots. She now carried 1,428 metric tons of coal and 329 metric tons of fuel oil, increasing her deep displacement to 10,864 metric tons. On 2 February 1932, during the first Shanghai incident, Izumo became the flagship of the newly re-established Third Fleet under Admiral Kichisaburo Nomura, arriving in Shanghai 6 days later. In 1934, Izumo was equipped to operate a floatplane at the Sasebo Naval Arsenal. Shortly after the outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War in July 1937, Izumo came under attack on August 14 during a series of Chinese Air Force raids in the Battle of Shanghai. Most of the bombs fell harmlessly into the river, but 2 struck among spectators, resulting in hundreds of casualties. Izumo's Nakajima E-4N floatplane, along with another from the light cruiser Sendai, managed to take off and claimed to have shot down a Curtiss Hawk biplane fighter and a Northrop Gamma bomber. 2 days later, her E-4N claimed another Hawk. That same day, Izumo was targeted by a Chinese torpedo boat, but the torpedoes missed, and the boat was abandoned by its crew. Throughout the battle, Izumo provided naval gunfire support to Japanese forces ashore and was repeatedly attacked by Chinese aircraft without sustaining damage. Still stationed in Shanghai at the start of the Pacific War on December 8, 1941, Izumo captured the American river gunboat USS Wake and helped sink the British river gunboat HMS Peterel. On 31 December, the cruiser struck a mine in Lingayen Gulf while supporting Japanese forces during the Philippines campaign and was towed to Hong Kong for repairs in February 1942. Izumo was reclassified as a first-class cruiser on 1 July. She returned to Japan in late 1943 and was redesignated as a training ship for the Kure Naval District. On 19 March 1945, Izumo was attacked by American carrier aircraft off Itajima, but they failed to cause any damage. Shortly thereafter, her 8-inch guns were replaced by 4 5-inch Type 89 dual-purpose guns in 2 twin mounts, and 4 of her remaining 6-inch guns were removed. her light anti-aircraft defenses were significantly strengthened with the addition of 14 license-built Hotchkiss 25mm Type 96 light AA guns in 2 triple, 2 twin, and 4 single mounts, along with 2 13.2mm Hotchkiss machine guns in single mounts. On the 9th of April, Izumo was damaged by an American mine off Hiroshima. Although she was not targeted on the first day of the American aerial attack on Kure on the 24th of July 1945, she was nearly missed 3 times 4 days later. The shock waves from these detonations caused the ship's seams to spring, leading to flooding that ultimately caused her to capsize. Izumo was removed from the Navy list on 20th of November, and her hulk was raised and scrapped by the Harima Dock Company in 1947.